I did that wrong. Rewind. Hi, I'm Izzy, and welcome to The Truths About Reality, a series of talks where we discuss the difficult and challenging taboo topics within our society. I'm one of the 3 co-founders of the Independent Girls. When we set up the platform, we wanted a safe, non-judgmental, open escape, inviting inspiring people to share their stories and educate our followers on some of the trickier aspects of society. As we all know, the Black Lives Matter movement is prevalent, building a network to build power and bring justice, healing and freedom to Black people across the globe. I'm delighted today to bring you one of my beautiful friends, such an inspiration to me, who's agreed to share her story. Welcome, Tash. First question I want to ask you is, to what degree have you experienced racism in your life?
I think for me, a lot of the racism I've experienced has been verbal. Only on 2 occasions have I had any physical contact, which was just by aggressive hair pulling. So the first time I would think I was in a nightclub and I had my natural curly hair out, and I just remember feeling my head being pulled back really hard. And obviously that's because my hair was different. I didn't know who did it, but it hurt, and it just made me feel really uncomfortable. And straight away I just ran to the toilet and tied my hair up in a bun. And then the second time I had box braids in, and this girl kept coming behind me and pulling the braids and touching them and just saying things right in my ear. I can't really remember what she was saying, but and she left me, and then she came back again and she walked past me and yanked my hair really hard, to the point where it pulled my neck back. This doesn't really happen to people with, I suppose, normal hair, European hair. They don't, I'd never go up to someone and just touch their hair. It's invasive.
Totally.
And it's part of your body. It's you wouldn't go up to someone and just touch them. So why would you feel the need to touch someone's hair? That's a big issue for me, because growing up I've always really struggled with my hair. It seems like such a small detail, but that's my biggest insecurity. My weight's always fluctuated, my skin's always gone good or bad, but my hair is my biggest issue. It's
it should not be. It should not be.
But it's straight and it's in a bun, because I just don't feel comfortable with it out naturally. I've gone to work before with my hair out and curly, and people will make jokes and say things like, oh, have you been electrocuted? Oh, have you forgotten to brush your hair today? Oh, what's happened to your hair? Things like that. And they're okay, it seems meaningless comments, but when you hear that constantly, it just starts to build up in your subconscious. So in terms of words, people have called me all sorts of things, from nigger, packy, wog, called me monkey. They've made animal noises.
So disgusting.
Yeah, I mean, most of my the racism that I've really experienced is in my adult life. I mean, I experienced some racism growing up, but kids are a product of their environment. And so you can kind of when you're younger, you can kind of brush it off and think, well, I'm sure they didn't really mean that. But when adults do it, it's a much deeper issue for them, because they know what they're doing, if that makes sense.
And I think it's when you get into adult life that you realise that actually it's with intent as well.
Yeah, exactly.
When you're a child, you don't really think about things like that. It's not until you're older.
For sure. If someone says something to me, I usually just try and ignore it or brush it off. But sometimes, you know, you might just be I might be having a bad day, or I've just had enough, and I'll stand up for myself. But then it becomes like I then become the aggressive one. And then, you know, people will say, oh, I'm sure they didn't mean it like that. But they have, you know, they've got the balls to say it like, oh, when I start to speak up, like, oh, I'm sure he didn't mean it. But if whoever he or she said something to me, like, they just sit there quietly. But when I speak, it's an issue. But when they've insulted me, it's like, oh, well, they'll try and, like, you know, go around the recon to find an excuse as to why they probably didn't mean it. Or they're just part of this generation, like, oh, they, you know, they're used to it when they grew up. Like, excuses, they're not good enough. Like, if you say something, you've got to be accountable for what you say to someone. So if someone reacts, then, you know, you've got to, if you're the one overseeing the situation, you've got to step back and think, well, why are they reacting like that, instead of being defensive. If that makes sense.
Totally.
I was just going to say, I mean, I've experienced racism literally everywhere, like in an airport, in the workplace, school, uni, in theatre, because obviously that's what I did, nights out, as I've said. So, yeah.
I think that leads me on to my next point about how did you deal with living in a predominantly white area? I've been to where you live, and it is a white area, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, when I was younger, I actually grew up in Nigeria, and I went to school there for 5 years. So I was the only mixed race child in my school, and then there was a white boy in my school as well. He was in my year, and we were the only two that weren't black in the entire school. And the funniest thing is that he used to really bully me, and he didn't pick on anyone else. It was just me, to, you know, and he'd make me feel like I didn't belong, or, you know, just really petty things. And then when I moved to the UK, back here, and I went to school, it was very alien for me, because I've gone from being around just black people to now just constantly being around white people. And to be fair, like, I don't think primary school was really an issue for me. I mean, you know, I could see the differences, and I mean, that's where I first started to, like, you know, relax my hair, and you know, wanted to, like, try and look more like the other girls, or you know, just to fit in, because I've already got this, like, thought in my head that I know I'm different, and I know wherever I go, whether it's part of my English heritage or my Nigerian heritage, I stick out like a sore thumb. And I think, you know, when it comes to, like, dealing with growing up in a white society, especially where I grew up, you just kind of, like, struggle with your identity a lot, being mixed race, because you're, you know, at home, I was pretty much brought up around the black side of my family more than the white side of my family. Then when I leave home, I'm around all my white friends, and there's just this constant thought in the back of your mind, like, oh, I've got to act this way when I'm with these people, and then I can go back home, and then I can act like this. So that's how, I guess, I felt at the time. But I think dealing with racism here, I kind of disregarded it a lot. So kind of, like, tried to look the other way, you know, like, people will say to me, they'll always, like, ask, like, oh, do you experience racism? And I'm like, well, yeah, of course. Like, sometimes it's on a weekly basis, you know, and they'll be like, well, that's terrible. Like, people will be so outraged about it. I'm like, well, what? And they'll ask me, what did I do? And I'm like, well, what do you want me to do? What am I supposed to do? Because I've already told you, like, if I try and defend myself, I then get painted to look like the villain. Like, there's only so much you can keep taking before you start to, like, just feel like, okay, well, I'll just ignore it.
And I think that's what's so amazing about the Black Lives Matter movement, because there's like a unity there that actually everyone's realizing you've put up with it for so long, and why are you putting up with it for so long? But also for me, it's raising awareness, because I don't think I realized how terrible it is and how much it goes on in day-to-day life, and I don't think I've ever realized it at all.
No, I think you're not alone. I mean, my own dad didn't really, sometimes I don't really go out of my way to tell my parents, like, oh, well, someone said this to me today, or, oh, you'll never guess what someone said to me this day or last week or whatever. And then only ever if we're on, you know, we have a conversation about race, and then I'll say, well, did you know this happened to me? And they're like, well, no, you've never told me. And I'm like, but why should I have to keep telling you that this is happening? Like, you are my parent, you should know that I will feel, you know, some sort of attack because of my skin color. And I think it's just part of like people being a bit naive sometimes, like, because okay, like I'm a cisgender heterosexual woman, but I don't necessarily, you know, go through what the LGBTQ plus community go through in terms of like discrimination, but I don't need to go through it to understand that they suffer with that. Do you know what I mean? And it's the same with race, if that makes sense.
That's, you told me a story about your mum as well and your neighbour.
It's like, it's difficult because we've always had issues with neighbours, and you know, just making my mum feel like she shouldn't be living in the area that she lives in. It's quite a nice area, you know, she doesn't belong here, and she's constantly being picked on for very little things. And my mom's got tough skin, you know, she's always like, you know, telling me like, don't let it get to you, you know, there's not much you can do about it. But there's a lot that can be done about it. And I think for me, one of the key things is education.
Totally.
We don't really get taught enough about other cultures when we're in school. You know, I did history for A levels, and I learned about, you know, Napoleon. I learned about all the kings, like the War of the Roses, the Tudors. I learned about the American Civil War, but that's pretty much it. You know, I feel like the curriculum needs to be a bit more diverse for future generations. People say they don't understand like systemic racism or institutionalized racism. Like that's part of it. Like, we don't get taught about these cultures and, you know, different backgrounds and their histories, because, or if we do, we gloss over it. Do you know what I mean? We just do like a lesson here or a lesson there, and then that's it. Or there's like Black History Month. It's like, you know, the term black starts to gets put in front of things, so you become like a black artist, you become a black singer, a black performer, instead of just getting rid of whatever race you are and just being acknowledged for what you do.
The last question that I want to ask you is, where do you feel most uncomfortable or unsafe?
I think for me personally, because I can only speak about my experiences, I don't think I've ever really felt unsafe, like not felt safe in a situation, because I usually know that, you know, people who say things are either, yes, they're racist, but some people can be ignorant. They don't intentionally mean to come out with a racist remark, but they do, and then they don't realize that they have. But I do feel uncomfortable a lot. I feel uncomfortable the most in my hometown. Like, that's why I've moved away. Like, that's been one of the biggest issues for me, has been trying to get away from it. When I went to Bristol, and when I went to uni in Bristol, I felt so like comfy. Like, no, I didn't feel like I was being stared at if I had my hair a certain way, or you know, because it's so multicultural, I wouldn't feel the need to acknowledge that someone was black, like, or
Yeah.
Asian, or a different ethnicity. Whereas like whenever, even just from growing up to like adulthood, if ever I've seen someone who I know isn't a local but they're of a different ethnic background, I'll be like, mom, oh my god, look,
Yeah.
someone, someone else is here. And it's sad that I've done that in the past, because I guess I shouldn't have to think like that, but I do. Like I get a bit excited, like, oh, maybe they live here now, and I have, to be fair, seen that since I was younger and now, how much more diverse like the schools have become in my area, and people moving in, I guess, to the area. And I always just try and think of ways that hopefully my sister won't have to experience, like, that I've had to experience. But I think to answer your question, I feel most uncomfortable in my hometown. I feel most uncomfortable in airports. I feel most uncomfortable in work scenarios, and I feel most uncomfortable when I'm in a situation where someone has just been racist to me. That's the most uncomfortable I feel, because I feel uncomfortable to start with, and then you've made me feel uncomfortable.
Totally.
I don't necessarily walk into a bar or an open space and then instantly think, people are going to like judge me because of the color of my skin. But it's only when it happens, if that makes sense. It's wrong to have, because everyone's like, because of this whole Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of people who are either against it or they don't understand it will say things and be like, well, that's just my opinion. But I think it's really dangerous for people to keep saying that they have opinions on issues that people can't change about themselves, whether that's race, gender, sexuality, disabilities, whether you've been a victim of assault, sexual or physical, that sort of thing. You don't ask for these things to happen to you. So for someone to sit there and say, well, that's just my opinion, it's really hurtful, because you're disregarding, the pain, the trauma that people go through daily, because you don't experience it, so therefore you can't understand it and you don't want to understand it, if that makes sense. So I think it's just like microaggressions are a massive thing, and the tables always want to be turned. So I'm not racist. Oh, this, you get defensive about it. Well, if you're not, you don't need to be defensive. You don't need to act like someone's just attacked you, because within yourself where you lie. But I also want to say one more thing. Because I'm mixed race, I am lighter skinned, and I have certain privileges that people who are darker than me don't have. I acknowledge that every day, and I just challenge people who are, lighter than me to just think about that, because I know what privileges my skin gives me being lighter, but I also know what disadvantages it gives me as well. So we have to think about these things when we're considering how people feel about race issues. So yeah, that's pretty much what I was trying to.
Thank you so much for talking to us. We really appreciate it, and you're amazing. And
You're amazing. I've enjoyed it.